So welcome everybody. It's so good to see all of you around the screen. I see some familiar names and I see some new names, and it's all great to see. My name is Helen Blyer. I serve as the leader for the Lifelong Learning Center here at Columbia Theological Seminary, and I'm joining you from Decatur, Georgia. I'm also delighted to be the one who steers the good people on the leadership team for ALEM, the Association of Leaders in Lifelong Learning for Ministry. We've got a couple of our exec members here. I see Sarah Erickson's name. Daryl has joined us. There may be a couple of others who join us. These are good people who do a lot of good thinking and collaborating to support lifelong learning leaders today. So anyways, thanks to my leadership team and for your help in brainstorming the ideas for the kinds of resources we're able to provide lifelong learning leaders. So before I introduce today's webinar and presenter, I want to share some amazing news. We are delighted to announce the forthcoming publication of the first new collection of writings on lifelong learning for ministry in, yes, a quarter century. Here is a screenshot of the cover of the book. It's called Sustaining Ministry Education, Cultivating the Ecosystem of Lifelong Learning. It has been edited by ALEM exec member Daryl. Daryl, go ahead and wave so that everybody knows who you are. And it was supported by generous funding from the Carpenter Foundation. It's going to be released by ALA Open Press this fall and will be available free as a download or by print through Amazon.com. As we were discerning what publishing house to use, I'm going to ask for those of you who are not muted to go ahead and mute yourselves if you're not already muted. There. We wanted to make sure that we had maximum accessibility to the material. We know from our observations and from our data that leaders of lifelong learning for ministry frequently do not have much in terms of resources to support their work with professional development or materials. So we prioritized open access. We wanted to give access to people like you to all of that material. And we cannot wait to go live with this. In fact, we've just pulled together, thanks Daryl, for our 26-27 webinar schedule. And all of the webinars, which will be up on our newly designed ALEM website imminently, will showcase writers and thinkers whose work has been gathered in this volume. So yay, all of us who are part of that work. We are so excited to see that come to fruition. So now our webinar for today. So we often ask ALEM members and other lifelong learning leaders to tell us what they need, what would be most useful. As a guild that intends to be a community of practice, a resource, a think tank, and an advocate for lifelong learning for ministry, our work as a guild is only as relevant as its ability to respond to the needs and contexts of other people who do this work. So the number one topic that we get asked about is finances. How do we create sustainable economic models for our programs? What are the templates that we have to draw on? Are there models out there? But there's a problem. The very diversity of programs and contexts means that there could never be a one-size-fits-all or even enough program models to put on a single hand that could provide universal insight that folks are asking for. So this compelled me to call up my friend and colleague, Bob Landrebe, who's our guest today. And he brings some serious chops to this work. I couldn't be more delighted to welcome him to the screen. After starting his career in business and public accounting as a CPA, he spent more than 40 years helping nonprofits and theological schools align mission and money. He served a combined 30 years as the CFO and second in command at World Relief and Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and he was later senior vice president and COO at Asbury Theological Seminary. He finally went to a well-earned retirement in 2019, and then he promptly shifted to part-time consulting. He's advised presidents, CFOs, and boards across theological education. He's presented with the Association of Theological Schools. He's partnered with the Interest Center for Theological Schools as a speaker, a mentor, a board member, and a coach. I know him for bringing both clarity and a bit of humor to tough strategic conversations with a steady belief that mission, and margin travel best together. So I am going to spotlight you now. Um, there we go. I'll put myself on spotlight as well. And welcome, Bob. It's so good to have you here today.
Thanks, Helen. And some of what you said there was actually true. So,
AI is a miraculous thing. I'm joking. Really, I got the bio from Bob himself, and out of the whole flourishes. So, spoiler alert, we're not going to give plug and play templates today, are we?
no,
No. What are we
we're
going
not
to
going to
talk
do that.
about today?
Well, I think what we're going to be looking at today are three questions that I think are really important to consider when we think about sustainable business models. We want to talk about the why, the what, and the how.
Right.
And I mentioned to Helen before we began this afternoon that I wanted to make sure that we gave enough time towards the middle and end of the slide presentation so that you all can actually have some maybe more practical ways of envisioning what sustainable business models might look for you in your particular context. But I think it's always important to start with why. And so we will look at, why is financial sustainability an important topic? And so we'll look at the why and then we'll move to the what and the how. And maybe we could just move along a little bit towards uh, what I would call is the number one important thing to consider, and that is a concept that I learned from a consultant named Vijay Govindarajan. And he has something that he calls the three-box solution. And I've shared this with Helen and with some of my other colleagues in the past. And the three-box solution, the best way for me to describe it is to tell the story that Vijay himself shared at one time. And he was working with a a company with the president and the president's executive team, and he gave them each five index cards, and he handed them out. There were about seven of them in the room, and he said, "I would like for you to just write down the titles of the five most important strategic initiatives that is in your company's strategic plan right now." So each of the executives did that. They wrote their five most important strategic initiatives on the index cards. And then he put out in front of them three boxes. And he labeled box number one, the present. And he labeled box number two, the past. And he labeled box number three, the future.
Mhm.
And these boxes were open, and then he said, okay, now I want you to take your five index cards, and I want you to put them in one of these three boxes. And here's what I mean by the present. The present is your current core operating, your current operating model. And I want you to identify which of your strategic initiatives belong in the present, that they will help advance your organization's core operational model as it exists today for, in this case, maximum productivity and profitability. And then I want you to take any index cards that you have in which you aren't to selectively abandon past practices, past policies, or past projects or programs that are no longer relevant or they are hindering your future ability to innovate and create margins. And then I want you to take any index cards that represent the future, and those represent future innovation and breakthrough ideas that might result in new business models for your company. And so each of the executives took their index cards, and almost all of them landed in box one. None of them landed in box two, and just a few of them landed in box three. And he went on to,
What's the explanation here? Because I just look at theological education as an industry, and I think, oh, there's a lot that could go in box two right now.
right, yeah. And
Yeah.
that's a great question. And I think the reason is that most executives do not realize that if you're going to selectively abandon the past,
Mhm.
it doesn't happen unless you actually have an initiative that'll actually create the energy around the elimination of it. In other words, if you have policies that are hindering innovation, then it actually takes work to actually eliminate a policy and replace it with one that's going to work for you in the future. If you have programs that are frankly losing money and they're old programs that are maybe attached to people who love those programs and are still with the organization, it's very difficult without an initiative to actually eliminate that program because people's careers are invested in those particular initiatives.
And
And,
often there's senses of identity too,
definitely
real
their sense of
attachment to
identity.
those things.
And so in some cases, you need to actually create an initiative to actually celebrate how that program benefited generations of people, perhaps. But now it's time to move it on and move it off and to celebrate that initiative that made such a big difference in the past, but does not have a future.
Mhm.
And then the reason that there's so many executives do not consider box three initiatives is that these are initiatives that will not benefit the next 3 to 5 years in most
Right.
cases because they are breakthrough ideas that require experimentation, that require successes along with a lot of failures. And
Mhm.
many times business leaders don't feel like they can take the risk to do things that are going to benefit maybe a future generation and not their current situation as executives. And
I think
so,
it would be easy to take what you've just said and replace business leaders with leaders in theological education, because it is by nature a kind of conserving industry with and the sparks of real innovation and appetite for risk do sometimes seem to be few and far between.
yeah, I think you're right, Helen. And I think that's why, if you look at this particular slide, box three, the future, in this case, I gave the example of a seminary. Create the seminary of the future by converting breakthrough ideas into new programs with sustainable business models. And
Mhm.
so many of the box three initiatives in theological education, I think, are probably lifelong learning related
Mhm.
in the context of our conversation today.
Mhm.
So, and I think it'd be helpful for us to take this kind of concept of box one, two, and three and take a look at how this might translate into a couple of 2 by 2 grids. So
All
why don't we,
right.
yeah, so why don't we take a look at this first one called mission and margin. What I mean by mission is mission impact. So you'll see in the vertical here that we have high mission impact down to lower mission impact. And then on the horizontal scale, we have program surplus on the right and program
Mhm.
loss on the left. And of course, everybody wants their programs to be in the upper right
Oh, of
quadrant.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Up and to the right is really nice to have. And in many cases, box one initiatives, box one programs tend to be in that top quadrant, but they can also slide into that either upper left quadrant, or frankly, they can move to any one of those quadrants depending upon what's going on in that particular, in this case, seminary's lifespan. And so most schools today, and I know that we have maybe some denominational folks here that aren't all seminaries, so excuse me if I'm using seminaries in my examples, but you can contextualize it for yours, of course. But I think what I'm trying to get at is that box one initiatives, box one programs typically have to be in the upper right to be healthy. But if they
Mhm.
are moving away from that upper right quadrant into any other quadrant, then there is a special need for box two and box three initiatives. So why don't we go to the next slide and then we can actually take a look at what it might look like for lifelong
Mhm.
learning versus degree programs. Now, this was me just giving a hypothetical example, but many times the policies and practices of seminaries are such that things like endowment funds and general revenues, like general gifts, annual giving, and that sort of thing, are directed towards degree programs. So they kind of underwrite a lot of the degree programs, which put them in the upper right quadrant. And they're viewed internally as certainly higher in mission impact, and they are able to generate, in many cases, a program surplus. But many of the times that's because of the current policies and practices of the institution. Lifelong learning, on the other hand, can, in this case, be in the upper left quadrant. They are high in mission impact, but they have not yet found a business model that allows them to generate a surplus. And
Mhm.
again, we're looking at the direct revenues minus the direct costs. We're not looking at trying to fully absorb all the costs or allocated costs that perhaps the administration might want to lay on to lifelong learning. We're looking
Mhm.
at the actual incremental direct costs of a lifelong learning programs and comparing those against the revenues. And the key thought here is that if a program always needs a subsidy, it can never scale. And so that's one of the great incentives and the answer to the why of why is a financially sustainable business model important for a program like lifelong learning. Let's take a look at another grid. And that's the grid in which we look at what is entitled Market and Moxie. I was trying to be a little bit cute there. Moxie really represents kind of the competency level within the institution. So, and the market represents whether the market is growing or declining in market size. And so here we have an example of, again, up up and to the right is great when you have growing market size and the competencies within the institution to take advantage of a growing market. That's where you want to be. That's the sweet spot. But when you're just in the beginning stages of trying to respond to a growing market, you may find that you still don't have all the competencies that you need in order to move into a situation where that growing market translates into high mission impact with an operating surplus. Now,
Mhm.
if we take a look at the hypothetical example of this with regards to seminaries and lifelong learning, what we may find here is that the degree programs may be actually moving to the lower right quadrant, where you have high competencies but a declining market size. And
Mhm.
in the growing, on the lifelong learning, you actually are seeing a growing market size, but still working towards the issue of competencies. And what I mean by competencies are all competencies. Is there a competency within, let's say, a seminary to actually create a business model in which that growing market size is translated into a profitable business model?
Mhm. So just to be clear, when we're talking about competency, I can see, imagine some people sitting up a little bit straighter, saying, "What do you mean we're not competent?" You're talking about the infrastructure, appetite, capacity within the institution to support lifelong learning programs in an economically responsible and profitable way.
That's exactly what I'm saying, Helen. Yeah.
Okay.
So I know we're rushing through this, but we've got a lot more to cover. And if it's okay, I'd like to move on to looking at the what. And the what really in my mind is it's the heart, it's the centerpiece of a business model, and that's the value proposition. And so let's move on and look at a couple of definitions of value proposition. So the business definition there is the bundle of products and services that are available for a specific customer segment or that are directed towards a specific customer segment. Now, if we look at how do we maybe translate that for a, a seminary, I would say it's the valued programs designed specifically for church leaders and lifelong learners to help them more effectively and faithfully respond to their ministry callings. So that's a lot of words, but let me try to make that a little bit more real life and take a look at what we mean by value proposition design. How do we take that definition and actually design something that would look like a useful value proposition? Now, I did something that I don't know if it's like viewed as cheating in the industry today, but I did this. I took my little chat GPT, you know, large language learning large language model app, and I asked this question, Helen. I said, I'm analyzing the value proposition for American pastors.
Hmm.
What are pastors what are the pastor's jobs, pains, and gains that should be considered in developing a value proposition for continuous lifelong learning for this group? I was trying to save myself time, but I was flabbergasted by the response I got in ChatGPT. And here's what they said to me. They said, that's a great question and a really important one if lifelong learning is going to feel essential rather than one more thing for busy pastors.
Okay.
And so let me just kind of, as an example, using this definition of how do you design, what are pastors' jobs, pastors' gains, pastors' pains, and how do you design that for a value proposition fit? So let me just read a little bit of this. I found it fascinating. Here are the the proposed pastor's jobs. These aren't just tasks, they're expectations placed on pastors by congregations, denominations, and their own sense of calling. So they listed five of them. One, spiritual and theological leadership, such
Mhm.
as preaching weekly, teaching scripture and doctrine, providing spiritual direction and discipleship. Number two, pastoral care, such as counseling individuals, couples, and families, crisis response to death, illness, conflict, and trauma, and such as presence in hospitals, homes, and during life transitions. Number three, organizational leadership, such as managing staff and volunteers, managing budgets and resources, strategic planning and vision setting, navigating governance like boards and elders and denominational structures. Fourth, a fourth job, community and cultural engagement, such as interpreting cultural issues for the congregation, engaging local community needs, leading in areas like justice, reconciliation, or public witness. And the
They're not wrong.
no, and the fifth job, personal formation and longevity, such as sustaining their own spiritual life, managing family and personal health, and navigating career trajectory and calling over time. And what ChatGPT said, it kind of says, as an implication of these core jobs, is that lifelong learning must serve multiple roles simultaneously, not just better preaching, but integrated leadership. So then they suggested here are the pains. Here are some pastoral pains. Number one, time scarcity and fragmentation, such as weekly sermon deadline, which dominates everything, constant interruptions and reactive work, little margin for deep learning. That means, folks, that lifelong learning can often feel like extra work.
Sure.
Number two, isolation and loneliness, such as that there are few safe peers to process with honestly, and that leadership roles limits vulnerability. It's especially acute in solo or small churches.
Mhm.
A third pain, role overload and ambiguity, such as what's expected to be of a theologian, a CEO, a counselor, a fundraiser, a community leader. and they often feel undertrained in these areas. A fourth, pain, is emotional and spiritual burnout, compassion fatigue, conflict from within the congregation, and the stress of declining attendance or giving in many contexts. And then the fifth one, rapid cultural change, dealing with technology, politics, sexuality, generational shifts, and the pressure to respond wisely without adequate frameworks or experience. And then
So
financial.
as you're going through this list, part of the commentary I have running in my head is how much does seminary curriculum actually address these jobs and pains? And the place of lifelong learning, as it can be in one case, a place where you go to make up for the things that you didn't get in seminary, or maybe could not have addressed in seminary because that wasn't the right time to do it. Some things you can only learn in the field, or a possible curriculum for a lifelong learning program that provides an alternative to seminary degree programs for ministerial preparation, which is another place where non-degree and lifelong learning programs are growing these days. They've basically given marching orders with this overview.
Absolutely. And what it shows is that, you know, one's a pastor. In fact, not all these pastors necessarily went through seminary, right? A lot of
Mm-hmm.
pastors go right from Bible college and
Mm-hmm.
are they have a they're pastors, or they are they're working in the business field, and then they are doing a part-time pastoral assignment. And
We have on our screen an expert in bivocational, multivocational ministry. So all of the things that you're describing here become complexified when you have somebody with multiple roles they have to play in their lives.
right, that's exactly right. And so what the Chat GPT example gave, and we won't go through the pastoral gains because there's lots of those too, but they all help us really laser focus, right, on
Mm-hmm.
how do we imagine a value proposition that addresses those complex job expectations and the pastoral pains and gains in a way that can meet their needs and yet can result in a program that you pilot test, that you design and pilot test, that can eventually result in a business model that delivers that value proposition in an affordable way within the institution
Mm-hmm.
to generate a business model that can scale lifelong learning.
Mm-hmm.
That's the that's the importance of this value proposition as the centerpiece. And the value proposition always needs to be linked with your lifelong learning. And I'm going to say customer. I hope that's not an offensive term, but think,
Participant, yeah,
yeah,
client,
participant,
yeah.
learner, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
client. But I use pastors, but you could be looking at all kinds of clients, right?
Mm-hmm.
Besides pastors who are lifelong learners. So let's let's move from the what to the how. And
Okay. And
what we're
you've got a little video you want us to watch. Do you need
yeah,
to set this up?
we've got a little video. Before you press go, I want to warn everybody, this goes really fast. This is a 2-minute video. And we may even want to play it twice, Helen, just because it to me it was this was one of those aha moments in my career when I said, this makes so much sense to me. And again, my role in both at World Relief, my role at Gordon Conwell, my role at Asbury Theological Seminary, and my role doing some consulting work was always looking at the business side of seminary, the business side of various programs. And this particular approach to business models made the most sense. And that's why I'm a strong advocate for it. I didn't invent it. I just am a beneficiary of it. And I'm just excited to share it with all of you today. So take a look at this. It's going to go fast. And if
Mhm.
we want to, we can do it again.
So I'm looking at this. Are you getting feedback?
I am.
Um, so I'm looking at this. Okay, it's not. Um, the business model canvas explained from Strategizer. It looks like that's where you got it from. So if you, off the top of your head, know what the website is, folks want access to it, if you could plot the URL or the link to the video in the chat as I am playing the
Yeah.
video, that would be
And
great.
in fact, the last slide has the link to it.
Great, thank you.
You
Okay,
bet.
let's hit play, friends.
An organization's business model can be described with 9 basic building blocks: your customer segments, your value proposition for each segment, the channels to reach customers, customer relationships you establish, the revenue streams you generate, the key resources and key activities you require to create value, the key partners, and the cost structure of the business model. But it's not sufficient to just enumerate the 9 building blocks. What you really want to do is to map them out on a pre-structured canvas. This is what we call the business model canvas, a tool that helps you map, discuss, design, and invent new business models. Let's briefly go through the 9 building blocks, starting with the customer segments. These are all the people or organizations for which you're creating value. This includes simple users and paying customers. For each segment, you have a specific value proposition. These are the bundles of products and services that create value for your customers. The channels describe through which touchpoints you're interacting with customers and delivering value. The customer relationships outline the type of relationship you're establishing with your customers. The revenue streams make clear how and through which pricing mechanisms your business model is capturing value. Then you need to describe the infrastructure to create, deliver, and capture value. The key resources show which assets are indispensable in your business model. The key activities show which things you really need to be able to perform well. The key partners show who can help you leverage your business model, since you won't own all key resources yourself, nor will you perform all key activities. Then once you understand your business model's infrastructure, you'll also have an idea of its cost structure. So with the business model canvas, you can map out your entire business model in one image. This works for startup entrepreneurs just as well as for the most senior executives.
All right, there
Let's
you have
see.
it.
Let's see if I can get to the next one because, oh, I keep on having issues with, oh, here we go. Here's our canvas. Okay, so yeah, I get the mind blown thing. And friends, if you downloaded the PDF that I put in the chat, it does have a canvas in it that you can play with. So when you grab that PDF, you can print it and start playing with it yourselves. I do have to say, Bob, I'm disappointed. I thought being a lifelong learning leader was just about thinking cool thoughts and running cool programs. Now you're telling me I've got to do all of this work here.
Sorry, that's true.
You know, I was having a conversation with a colleague, and we were talking about the fragility of theological schools these days and how this, the enterprise of theological education won't be saved by really cool niche theologians. It's going to be saved by people who have some business savvy. And what you've done here is given us a really accessible tool to begin to have a little bit more business savvy, even if we don't have the benefit of having been trained in a CPA or other finance related program like yourself.
Yeah, well, and I realize that some of you may be within organizations, denominations, seminaries, churches, where you don't yet have a partner, like in the business office. And it's great if you can even share this kind of a business model with some of those folks because it's wonderful if you have people that are in even senior leadership that become advocates because this makes sense to them as well. But let me just kind of take a little bit of time here just to talk about a couple of pieces on this business model canvas. You'll see that the value proposition is right in the center,
Mm-hmm.
and that on the far right-hand side are your customer segments. And I actually put in there 4 examples of what I think are pretty um, standard segments that all of your lifelong learning folks should think about as possibilities. So the value proposition can relate, of course, to your learners and all your different learning segments, right? But you have donors and grantors and your own institution that can actually be either external or internal customers. Let me describe that. Let's talk with grantors. Uh, One of the things that grantors like to do is fund innovation. So if a lifelong learning initiative can capture the imagination of a grantor to actually provide upfront money to test or to experiment with new ideas, then you as an institution can provide a very important value proposition to that grantor. Does that make sense, Helen?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the same is true with donors. Donors are looking to invest their money in ministries that have kingdom impact. And so if you can find donors that are interested in supporting an initiative that they believe is going to give life or um, support their, I'll give the example of a pastor again. If you can find donors who want to support their pastors, then that becomes another revenue resource to support a lifelong learning initiative, not just what the pastor or the other lifelong learner might pay as a fee to
Mm-hmm.
take advantage of that lifelong learning. And lastly, I think that your institution can also be a customer segment. It's an internal customer. But I think most of you would realize, and I'm preaching to the choir, of course, that lifelong learning can and does provide a valuable resource to the institution. In other words, successful lifelong learning programs are ways to introduce folks that can become donors to your institution.
Or the shoulder tappers who send potential pastoral candidates to your school, or spread the word and get other clients, learners into your community. Yeah, we are very much in the business of friend raising.
That's right. And so one of the important value proposition target groups can be your own institution.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not looking at the institution as being kind of the funder of all your cool ideas. It's
Mm-hmm.
really the other way around. It's the institution seeing how valuable lifelong learning is. So, I think the next slide will um, help us take the next step in kind of imagining this work, Helen. And that
Mm-hmm.
is taking a look at the right side of the canvas compared to the left side of the canvas.
Mm-hmm.
So if we take a look at the upper right-hand side of the canvas, everything from value proposition to customer segments and channels and key relationships, those 4 combined are how lifelong learning creates value.
Mm-hmm.
So the upper right-hand part of the canvas is all about creating value.
Mm-hmm.
If you're able to create value, it will generate revenue. I'm a strong believer in when you're able to create strong value, you have the ability to find ways to create revenue from that value.
So the money follows the mission.
The money follows the mission. Exactly.
So we've
Well,
got a question in the chat here, and you can say whether or not you're going to be flagging this later, um, or if you want to talk about it now. We have a number of folks on the screen who are leading initiatives that have been bankrolled by the Church's One Foundation, the Lilly Endowment Incorporated. So we've got a lot of people who have initiatives that were begun with generous funding from a very large granting organization. And they are given, let's say, 4 or 5 years of that initial funding to set up a scheme that will have built-in sustainability once the grant funding sunsets. How does all of this speak to people who have gotten angel funding from an outside organization that bankrolls the startup? What should they be doing and thinking about to ensure that the program can continue if it's a viable program after the sunset of the funding? Or do you want to talk
yeah,
about that later?
we can talk about it now. I think
Okay.
that I would say this, it would be really important early on if there was not an exercise that was done before the proposal was submitted to Lilly to test the value proposition with a specific customer segment, that it would be very important to begin that work even now.
Mhm.
Uh, because it's if it's true that the value proposition is the centerpiece and that you have to understand the customer jobs, the customer's pains, and the customer's gains in order to fashion a value proposition that will generate revenues that make it sustainable, the sooner you find that out as an organization, the better. And one thing that I think I've learned with the Lilly Endowment is that they love to be adaptive if they understand that you need to make a change, you need to make a pivot. And so I would say it's very important to stay in the spirit of box three, if it is a box three initiative, and that is do experimentations, test a lot of things. There's the saying, spend a little, learn a lot when
Mhm.
it comes to box three. Spend a little, learn a lot. And the point of that is when you're in a box three mode, you're not necessarily going to get it right the first time. And so it's really important to be be very much in the identification of markers that are going to help you to understand, will this lead to sustainability or will it not? And
Mhm.
if it is determined early enough on in this grant process that you have a winner in terms of an idea that can be sustainable, that's beautiful. But if on the other hand that you learn that that's not the case, I would not be discouraged by that. I would simply start looking at pivots and try to find ways in which perhaps you can adapt your value proposition to something that is more on target with the jobs,
Mhm.
pains, and gains of the key segment that you're trying to serve.
Great. Thank you. Shall we move ahead?
Yeah, let's look at the. I want to take a look at the left-hand side of the canvas because that deals with the efficiencies, Helen. Those are the
Mhm.
key resources, key activities, and the key partnerships that make it possible to deliver that value proposition. And then those result in the kind of cost structures that are affordable that when compared to the revenues can actually be an affordable business model.
So here we go. Left-hand side of the grid.
All right, so let's talk about the actual use of this particular business model canvas. So the way it's suggested is this. You take these post-it notes and you start imagining a specific program initiative that you have as a lifelong learning uh, group. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose of this is to essentially tell your story. So if we were practicing this right now, Helen, I would say, let me tell you a story. And I would take that chat GPT information that we had about pastors and their jobs, pains, and gains. And I would say, here's my here's my story. I
Mm-hmm.
believe that pastors today want on-demand learning. They want
Mm-hmm.
just-in-time learning, and they want to do it within a community of trusted peers who understand and get it. They understand what it's like to live in the trenches and to feel these stresses and to want to um, fulfill my calling for a sustained period of time. And so uh, I'm imagining a business model in which pastors don't have to pay for the resources that they need. In fact, what I'm imagining is the kind of uh, initiative where grantors and donors are going to come alongside and they're going to see the value of what we're going to be providing to our pastors. And so the next slide would then start kind of filling this out. And so I would take a couple of post-it notes and I would start with my customer segments. And I would say, okay, here are my customer segments. And on the right-hand side, I would say we have pastor learners who are also, in some cases, content providers. So they're not just learners, they're also sharing in the content to be delivered. And this is just an idea. This is not saying this is the way for lifelong learning. I'm giving an example of
Mm-hmm.
telling a story. And so what I want is to present my idea. And my idea is we want to have a value proposition that provides resources for this week's work for pastor learners. And I want to have a value proposition with my grantors in which I'm asking them to fund the innovation. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want them to fund the ongoing operating costs. I just want them to fund the risk monies up front. And so I'm going to present a value proposition that makes it persuasive to my grantor to make this a possibility, to actually take the risk off of the institution and have the grantor take the place of the institution to give me the risk money.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to try to develop some repeat donors who want to make affordable to pastors lifelong learning. I don't want to put the burden on pastors. I want donors to be the ones that see the value of this to pastors. And so this is my early design ideas of developing a business model. And so that's my start. And so then I would go to the next slide and I'd fill in I'd take all the rest of the post-it notes and I'd start filling in the right-hand side of the upper right-hand side of the value prop of the business model canvas. And so I'd start with the channels and I'd say, okay, how am I going to communicate this opportunity to pastors? And I would say maybe my first way is to look at alumni lists. That's that's the early way to begin to make a connection between pastor learners and resources for this week's work. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's my channel through alumni lists. Then I would look at my grantors and I would say, I got these mixed up actually. The lifelong learning platform should be next. So I'd say to
Mm-hmm.
my grantors, I want you to fund the lifelong learning platform that I want to design to fund this innovation. And then I would say to my repeat donors, I want you to help me fund Zoom webinars to make it affordable for lifelong learners.
Mhm.
And then I would say, what's the key relationships? And I would tell my story, continue to tell my story by filling out a post-it note and putting two ideas in there. One is to form a community of pastor learners. That is, I want to combine content and community. That's actually part of the value proposition.
Mhm.
It's to not just provide education, but it's to actually create a community. That's that relationship that's going to keep these pastors within this business model canvas for the long haul. And then I want to create a community of content creators. And that's going to connect, as we will see, to the left-hand side of the canvas and to make
Mhm.
it more affordable. So once I do that, then I can drop down to the revenue streams and say, okay, how do I actually imagine what these revenue streams would look like? And so you can see there that I have one idea, which is provide grant funding for the initial platform development. So that's where
Mhm.
it takes some work. You need to have some good ideas about, what would it cost me in terms of outside consulting fees and internal staff time and so forth to actually create a platform and to test it, get the bugs worked out, and to actually make it something that would be appealing to my pastors. And then develop a donor church funding per pastor's annual subscription. So it's a subscription model, but
Mhm.
it's not a subscription model where the pastor has to pay for it. It's a subscription model where the donor agrees to pay for it and they see the value of that.
Mhm.
And that in itself would create a whole list of work that would have to be accomplished to be able to actually develop that kind of thing. Now, think about box two here, Helen.
Mhm.
What if you're within an institution where the current policies within the advancement office would say to the lifelong learning department, well, we're not really comfortable with you talking to our donors. And then you say, well, we don't want to talk to your donors. We want to create a new donor pool. We want to, and so that might be, oh, well, that's a great idea. Let's talk about that. How do we create a policy where we know what you're doing and you know what our expectations are, and how can we help you? And all of a sudden, you're starting to create advocates within your institution and drawing in
Mhm.
your advancement folks who can now see this as a real possibility. And now you can actually then talk to your CFOs who are starting to get the idea that you're not looking to try to draw money necessarily out of the institutional's general annual fund. You're actually trying to create a whole new donor revenue stream.
Mhm.
So this is all part of my story. I'm trying to convince you here that this is the business model for you and for
Mhm.
us. Okay, so now I've filled out the right-hand side of the grid. So now I'm going
Mhm.
to start looking at the left-hand side. And so we start with the key resources. And so, one of the key resources for this particular unique business model idea is to develop a transaction platform and a content creation platform. Those,
Mhm.
those are two resources that maybe we have, but they don't necessarily fit the specific example and idea that I have. We may have a transaction platform, but it's designed for the individual receiving the lifelong learning to pay for it. And we want something different than that. We want a pastor to be able to sign up for this service, but we also want a donor to be able to develop a monthly pledge to pay for
Mhm.
it. So that's a transaction platform. But then we also need a content creation platform, something that's going to actually allow us to create resources for this week's work for
Mhm.
pastors.
Mhm.
But it's very time sensitive. And so those are the resources. The key activities might be, well, you've got logistics and you've got maybe a yearly conference where you actually invite pastors who not only want to be learners, but they want to be content creators. They want to help
Hmm.
share with some of their colleagues some ideas that can help them with the resources for this week's work. And so you bring together a group of pastors every year who are going to brainstorm on content creation. And then you have the activity of platform development. And in that particular case, you might want to go to a key partner, like the third bullet point down there in the green uh, uh, post-it note, where you've got a platform development expert, maybe an outside consultant who can work with your internal lifelong learning team to create the kind of platform that can deliver this value proposition, not just to your pastors, but also to your donors. And then your other key partners are maybe your denominational leaders, your churches, and other key influencers who can be part of that channel to make it known to not just folks on your alumni list, but people beyond it who might
Hmm.
really benefit from this. And then you have your pastor authors. You might have some pastor authors who simply want to help create content, but it's likely that they're also going to want to become part of this community of pastor learners because they might be an expert when it comes to counseling, but they may not necessarily be an expert when it comes to preaching. And
Hmm.
so they might want to benefit on one hand from the delivery of how do I get my weekly sermons developed more effectively, but how can I also share what it's like to be an effective counselor?
So, one of the things that I absolutely love about this sample program that you've just walked us through, and of course, many of you folks on the screen might not want a program that looks like this, but the thought process can
Hmm.
be transferred from place to place. I just want to point out it actually hews to uh, good practices of adult learning. It is relevant to people's experience. It is relational. It is responsive. It has the possibility of elevating people who are participants into leadership positions themselves so that it becomes a kind of self perpetuating thing. There's so much wisdom here, and it's I think it's a very compelling approach to designing a program that is meaningful for the ministry people we intend to be serving.
Hmm. Well, yeah, thanks, Helen. I mean, I have found this to be helpful in so many other contexts as well, not just lifelong learning. And
Hmm.
again, all of this activity on the left-hand side helps you actually develop a budget, the cost
Hmm.
structure. And
Hmm.
and then you keep working with it and then you realize, okay, my first go at the cost structure is not going to be affordable. So maybe there's certain key activities that I cannot take on as an organization and I need to move those over into the partnership side. And I
Hmm.
need to say, you
Hmm.
know what, I can't provide stipends. I need volunteers. And so you start finding ways to trim the costs by finding volunteers who might be able to do this for you.
Hmm.
And all of this is kind of a give and take. And again, if you're doing this within the context of your, let's say, your whole lifelong learning team, maybe some other outside experts,
Hmm.
you can tell this story and have people perfect it and say, well, have you thought about this? And have you thought about that? And before you know it, you're trading out post-it notes and you're presenting it in a different way.
I
Then,
love the idea of discerning all of this in communities. So many of the folks who are leaders of lifelong learning programs find themselves to be singletons. Maybe that's a service that Alan can provide as a community of folks who can help other people think through these things.
yeah. Well, I know that we're running at the end of our time, but my
Hmm.
challenge is to folks is to maybe consider using this particular business model canvas as a way of thinking through different lifelong learning value propositions and then
Mhm.
actually putting it out there as a story that you might tell to others and see if you can actually work through a business model that might work for your particular institution. So I hope that this has been helpful.
This is great. For those of you who are interested in the resources Bob used, please make sure you take a snap or grab this. It's also in the PDF that I shared. Um, I've got a little bit of time here for questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen so we can see each other. If there are any of you who want to stick around a little bit and ask some questions, please do so. You can go ahead and raise your hand, use the raise hand function. So that way you will bump to the upper left-hand corner of the screen and I can recognize you. Anybody? Yeah, Rebecca.
Just very practically, I love the visual effect of this, and I love the idea that it's building blocks for storytelling. It's a big thing for us. I'm with ABHMS and our Center for Continuous Learning. Good to see you all. I'm wondering, you provided the presentation, but it's in notes format. Can we get a PDF that's just the business plan, the blank one itself?
The business model? Well, we're you mean the canvas?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. In fact, what I was going to do is grab from Bob the PDFs of the couple of tools that he used and make them available to people who registered. So I will be doing that.
Let me also give thanks for asking that question, Rebecca. If you go to Strategizer, the website, there are ways to go in there and actually print out kind of the blank business model canvases, and they have a lot of resources that are free. You don't have to pay anything. Just go to that website, and you'll find just a treasure trove of resources available.
I've put the URL back in the chat since I took the slide down. Anybody else? Questions?
Hi, thank you so much. I would love, and maybe this is for Helen more than Bob, but I thought this was super helpful. We have a small continuing education team at the Institute of Pastoral Studies at Loyola, and we work a lot as a team and brainstorm, but none of us have training in business. And I thought this was so helpful because it gives me a structure beyond what I think would work or what I think people would want. And so it takes me kind of out of my comfort zone to go and ask people what they want, what they need, and then bring it back and try to find a way of funding it in a sense like you're proposing that we do everything, which I think is ultimately what's gonna work because nobody wants to pay for our services. But can we have like guidance on how to get the team together and do a brainstorming session and kind of plan and put sticky notes on the thing? Like I wouldn't know where to start, basically. That's what I'm saying.
So Bob, how would you grab a group of folks who are working on this stuff and strategize a meeting where we could fill out one of these grids together?
You mean within a specific organization or as a group? Here.
Well, I think she means a group within a specific organization. Am I right, Mariana?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that I would share this concept with folks that you think would be important contributors. Part of that would be if you have relationships with folks that are maybe in some key decision-making roles within your institution, try to find at least one of those that would be part of that exercise with you. And that way you can as in the process of doing this exercise, they might actually um, begin to love it themselves and see how it has value, not just in your specific situation, but in other contexts that they have. But I would say try to get as many of the folks in your organization that can contribute to brainstorming on lifelong learning for a business model canvas, but try to get somebody that's at a decision-making role that you would want in the room. And maybe they can do it as a favor to you even. But I think it's important to be able to talk both up, talk to leaders up within the organization and talk to your colleagues and then also the folks that report to you. Get as many of those as you possibly can who can actually contribute to the conversation in a valuable way.
The thing that I think is valuable about what you're suggesting, a couple of things. Number one, when you have somebody who's one of the gatekeepers at your institution participating in this, they become an advocate and they also begin to recognize, oh, it's not as easy as just telling you, Mariana, go do this thing, that there's a whole lot that's involved. So it may make them slow walk their own impulse to saddle you with their ideas. And we can walk through all of the stages of the canvas to help them see, oh, these are the questions that need to be asked. I find that this would be a really useful thing to do if given a mandate by somebody who's a superior to do a thing. Okay, let's work on this together. If you want us to do this, instead of you saying, no, we don't have the time and resources to do it, say, let's work through this together and identify whether or not we've got the infrastructure to make this happen and what decisions might need to be made. This is strategic because it gains you an ally too within the institution. And one of the key things we hear from lifelong learning leaders is the difficulty in getting administrations to understand what they're doing. If you're not in a freestanding shop, then having the stakeholders understand all of what goes into the sausage making behind lifelong learning and the value of it. This is a great way through the rigorous and very systematic thinking approach to get folks to take the work that you do seriously. It's not just about putting on cool programs.
Yeah, and Helen, it also is this. If you're asked by somebody in senior administration, we want you to put together a business model for lifelong learning, they may be thinking, okay, put together a budget. Here's revenues, here's expenses, here's how you have a quote balanced budget.
Mhm.
Well, what this business model canvas helps to communicate is that those are the latter things that you do, right? You start with the value proposition. You start with your customer segments. You start to understand what are the channels and the key relationships that you're trying to create, and how do you create value that can actually generate revenue. You don't just generate revenue because you want to generate revenue. You have to create value, right? And you have to look at all the different ways and all the different possibilities of creating value. So yeah, I think that it can be a really helpful way of helping to educate the senior leadership that it's not just about putting a budget together.
Bob, this has been so helpful. Friends, I know we're down to a tiny minion now, but I'm going to be sending out an evaluation to the folks who attended and see if there are further questions. Bob has agreed to make himself available for another webinar at some point if we've got a part 2 that we want to do. But thank you for being here. Thanks for your attentiveness, your good questions. Bob, as ever, thank you for your wisdom. We'll be here on May 13th at noon for the history of lifelong learning. I'll be telling you folks the story of how our little industry came to be. And it actually goes back not to 1968 and the founding of Alam. It goes back to the Didache in the earliest Christian community. We've got quite a legacy. So thank you, folks. Appreciate it, Bob, as ever. Thank you. It's been good to have all of you guys here on screen.
Thanks for the
Take care.
opportunity.
Take care.